Join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, before we get into the main topic tonight, we have to deal with the engine brake resolution. We need to rescind the one we passed at the April meeting. So I would move resolution 25-0430T001 to approve rescinding resolution 25-0416T011.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Jackson.
Aye.
Holiday.
Aye.
Trainer.
Aye.
Okay, the next motion is the replacement. Doug Riedel from Delaware County Engineer Office got this vetted with the ODOT and they approved this one. They didn't like the first one. That's why we rescinded it. It didn't refer enough to the higher revised code. This one is resolution 25-430T002. I'm going to read this thing, try to do it entirely. Prohibiting engine retarders and brakes, authorizing the installation of no engine brake signs. Whereas Harlem Township Board of Trustees, Delaware County, Ohio, have received complaints from township residents regarding the objectionable use of engine retarders and brakes, which results in audible cracking, chattering noise. And whereas the board finds the use of engine retarders and brakes distributes the public peace and general welfare. Whereas it is a desire of the board to prohibit the use of engine retarders and brakes on vehicles within the unincorporated area of Harlem Township on State Route 605 in accordance with sections 505.17A and 4513.221E4 of the Higher Revised Code. Now therefore it be resolved by the Board of Trustees of Harlem Township, Delaware County, Ohio, by the authority of sections 505.17A and 4513.221E of Higher Revised Code as follows. Authorizes the Harlem Township Administrative Assistant to proceed with the purchase of no engine brake signs to comply with the current Ohio Department of Transportation standards and to supply said signs to ODOT. Physical officers shall forward a copy of this resolution to ODOT and request them to post and maintain no engine brake signs at proper locations on State Route 605 within the township. Whoever violates provisions of this resolution shall have committed a traffic violation and penalty shall be imposed as provided by section 505.17E of the Higher Revised Code. Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call on that, please.
Jackson.
Aye.
Holiday.
Aye.
Trainer.
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. So we have the new resolution in place. With that, John, you want to introduce?
Sure. Part of the strategic planning process that was approved several months ago involved hiring an outside planner to kind of audit or oversee or provide input into the work that we're doing as a township, that Crossroads is doing, et cetera. And so I've met with Chris Herman from MKSK a couple of times, and he did submit a work authorization that the trustees will consider this evening. And I want to read the description of the project for the public. Thank you for reaching out to MKSK with the opportunity to provide professional planning services to Harlem Township to assist in planning for the future of the community. We understand that the township is working with township committees and outside consultants to create a strategic plan, as well as updated plans, policies, and zoning for the township. Based upon our discussion and understanding, MKSK's role is to serve as an on-call advisor to the township to meet, consult with, review, and make recommendations related to these efforts. To be flexible, responsive, and best address the township's potential needs, MKSK proposes an hourly agreement for 2025. It is expected that these services may include attendance at township-directed meetings, topical planning-related presentations, review and comment on draft planning policy zoning documents, and considerations related to placemaking and placekeeping within the township. Services to completed as part of this work authorization will be identified by the township, agreed to by MKSK, and authorized in writing. There are then 2.5 pages that are conditions related to this proposal. They do include fees for printing, creating products, and then hourly relates for a number of their kinds of employees, from the principal, which I assume is Chris, who comes at $330 an hour. I've had lunch with him twice. I hope I don't get charged. Down to their intern or an administrative assistant at $95 an hour. The landscape architects are $180, for example. Urban planners also at $180, $160. There was a paragraph here for a retainer, which I asked him about. Because this is an hourly contract, there is no retainer fee. It'll just be straight billing. Interestingly, we as trustees had agreed that this should not exceed $10,000. And I never mentioned a dollar amount to Chris, and yet the project fee came in at $10,000. And so we are looking at about $10,000 worth of work from MKSK over the course of the remaining strategic planning process. Any questions or comments as you guys were able to look at the contract and consider the scope of work?
And the name escapes me. What was the group that we had discussed? I think it was like a $30,000 contract with. Do you remember that?
We had talked to Montrose.
Montrose is the name.
About an economic development plan.
Right.
And then we discovered that Delaware County has Montrose on retainer, and we can actually have their services at no charge.
So that was money that we didn't spend.
That's
Right.
correct. And they'll actually be doing our economic development plan along with others.
And this is kind of what we always talked about doing, having somebody look down at what we've done and see if we got any weak areas or that type of thing.
I like it because it provides an outside perspective.
Yes.
And sometimes we get our heads down and we're not aware of what we don't know.
And Bob, Chris is the one that the forum sponsored at the church a while back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked him. I don't know if you were there, John.
I was.
He was pretty well spoken, very
Yeah.
clear. Reminded me a lot of Brian, who was here from Columbus.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I don't really have any concerns on my end. Holly, I don't know if you have anything to add.
We worked with, I've worked with Chris a number of times in the past, all the way back to beginning of my planning days. Very easy to work with, happy to work with him. I think that it's, when John and I talked about this first, of, my analogy of when you write a paper, you have a peer review. Similar type concept, and I think that it all makes sense, and I work well with Chris.
And they've worked with New Albany quite a bit, and they're doing the 62 corridor.
Hmm.
The current project.
So, seems like a good wagon to be hitched to. So, no concerns on mine.
Act on that.
In light of that, then I will move to approve signing a contract with MKSK to help in the Harlem Township strategic planning process, to be paid hourly and not to exceed $10K for total project fees. So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, motion's been moved and seconded to approve the contract. Ashley, roll call, please.
Jackson.
Aye.
Holiday.
Aye.
Tran.
Aye.
Motion carried, contract's approved.
John, question on that?
Yeah.
Would it be with the intent to maximize the contract value, or would it be at the culmination of the strategic planning initiative if we haven't maximized that $10,000 amount that we're we're really just billing as we go, right?
That's
So it's
correct.
not, we're not going to try to spend $10,000 unless it's justified.
That's right. Although when you compute it, you get about 30 hours out of Chris over the course of the contract if
Right.
you were to use just.
Mm-hmm. Not a bad week's work.
I'm in the wrong profession. Okay, may I
Yes.
introduce the next series of topics? So the purpose of our meeting tonight is really to focus on strategic planning and to relieve the trustees of some of their burden during their regular monthly meetings for these conversations, and for us to be able to just really focus on the strategic planning process. And so in that regard, there are a number of what I call lines of effort that I think that we're engaged in as a township that we want to talk about tonight. And I'll just review them quickly. And then Holly, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about strategic planning. But with strategic planning, notice that at the very top, I said that we're moving from a defensive posture to aspirational planning. So as I look at the entire process, in my mind, I see this shift in thinking. And these lines of effort represent an aspirational kind of planning that's really focused on the future. So in strategic planning, as we move from zoning and zoning overlays, we focused on identifying, prioritizing, and then making actionable strategic priorities. And Holly tonight is going to help us in that second step, which is we've identified, now we're going to work on prioritizing those strategic priorities. And then as the strategic planning process continues, we'll talk about how to make those actionable. As part of this process, there are bullet points that are ongoing. One of them is the Columbus conversation. That conversation supports the strategic priority of autonomy. That conversation is on hold right now until the township finishes its economic planning process, and then we will re-engage. You'll see tonight that one of the main themes of our identifying areas of importance is a town center concept. Jim talked about that, and clearly it's a thought that is paramount on the minds of our residents. And so I included that as something that we certainly should be considering and talking about. And in many ways, we might consider that as we are able to craft that vision and then actually create it on paper, that informs our residents, the direction that we're headed. And I think it also informs growth as it then occurs in various parts of the township. And so there are advantages to thinking about that. And I use the word branding. That came up in a couple of the soup sessions that I attended. That when you drive into a township, you see a sign, typically. The way you drive into Harlem Township and know you came into Harlem Township is that you left the township that you were just in. There's really not a welcome to Harlem Township. Here's who and what we are. And so can we do a better job with just communicating in that very way? And then thinking about how that applies, the first corner that's certainly going to be developed is the southwest corner. And so would love to have a meeting with large landowners, stakeholders, developers that are going to be working in that southwest corner.
59, Green Brook Road, unit stage, basic injury, station 450, and minute 9, 859, Green Brook Road.
When the township hall and the fire department are in the same building.
Yes.
There we go.
Thanks, Chief. So I've reached out to at least 3 potential developers that are looking at that southwest corner that own property. in that corner or in the southern tier to have a conversation about the strategic planning process and how that might inform development that is occurring there so that it doesn't occur haphazardly. It's just an initial, okay, let's get around a table and have a conversation. Economic planning, that will occur in May when Danny gets back from vacation. If you want to really see what that's going to look like, I would encourage you to look at Delaware County's economic development plan that was produced by Montrose, not for its content. We're not going to look like Delaware County, but for the process and how they did it. And what are the big bullet points out of that? And I crafted this bullet point kind of from that we want to develop an economic model that accurately reflects land use, economic development tools, identify infrastructure funding and revenue strategy, identify and market to desired economic partners, and standardize relationship practices in the public and private sphere. Infrastructure planning, tonight we'll give a report about the first meeting of the what does that stand for, Holly? LBWTS. Yeah, I put it backwards, didn't I? It's Big Walnut Trunk Sewer, phase 1. And so Holly and I went to a meeting on Monday to hear from the contractor and from Delaware County, and we'll go through their slides. We're working on policy. That is home rule, and Adam is beginning that exploration process. Personnel, township administrator, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And then behind all of this, we've been talking about getting our regional stakeholders together. We're thinking Berkshire, Genoa, Township, Trenton, Sunbury, Galena, and kind of the county taking the lead on this conversation in an informal conversation that opens dialogue. And so just as a model, there's development that's occurred up Route 33, and there's been a group meeting for the past decade. They meet every other month, and they've had an ongoing conversation about what's happening in their respective entities. And that building of relationships has been very good in working collaboratively with development up that corridor and really looking at this as being a model for that. Talked to Tyler Lane today from Berkshire, who's their township administrator, and he's enthusiastic about that process, as was the mayor in Sunbury. And so that meeting, the first meeting, I think is going to happen on May the 20th. So that's kind of the direction we're headed for tonight. And with that, Holly, I'll turn it over to you. And I got to figure out how to stop sharing.
It's okay here.
That's great. Can she be heard from where she is? You can grab it. Grab them.
Thank you. And I have Kelsey and Molly here with me tonight that have been helping through this process, and they're going to be taking notes and helping us work through putting these in order for the townships. Let me share screen. All right, there we go. So tonight, as Trustee Trainer indicated, we're here to talk about the strategic priorities. These priorities evolved over a course of time through the community meeting that we held in February followed by several soup sessions. The soup sessions, as you may recall, were a form of a meeting in a box, but they were in the form of a jar with instruction cards or recipes to let the meeting facilitator give them directions on how to move residents through thinking about the priorities for the township. The soup sessions were meant to try to move the word out further beyond just those who were able to attend a community meeting. And we did receive positive feedback from them. We had 9 soup sessions that were completed altogether with over 30 some attendees at those 9 sessions. It could be more folks, but what I did like hearing from our steering committee was that the sessions that they held, their attendees wanted to hold additional soup sessions. So not necessarily on the same topic, but as we move through this process, meeting again to learn what we've learned throughout this process. So keep those individual soup session meetings going with their respective steering committee members. So I thought that was a positive feedback. And then, so from that, we created a 1-pager, which I passed out previously. And what we've done tonight is taken that 1-pager and developed it into a number of slides to show what those priorities are coming out of all the different feedback that we received. And then what we will be asking you to do tonight is to rank those priorities in order of your preference. So which one do you feel as trustees is the most important, down to the, you know, not, I don't want to say least important, but just isn't as high up in your priority of moving forward immediately. So making sure that we're putting those in that correct order. So let's run through. Well, first of all, let's talk about a little bit about what we heard at the soup sessions. There was definitely a desire to stay rural, stay small, have agricultural businesses. And then a strong appreciation for community involvement. We heard that a lot throughout all the different strategies that we've utilized just to keep up that communication process with the residents. And then a lot of questions and a lot of concern about annexation, and then wanting to make sure that we're growing in a smart way. One thing that we really felt as we came out of those soup sessions, I did not attend any of those soup sessions, but I heard the steering committee report back to me on those. And what we heard a lot was that there's still education that needs to be done out there. The residents may have bits and pieces of different parts of history, different parts of things that have happened in 2-3 years, but understanding, you know, what the original comprehensive plan was in 2021, followed by the strategic guide, followed by the overlay districts. Where have we been? And why are we doing what we're doing today? Getting that message out even more to residents. So I think that that's probably the next thing that I'm going to do with the steering committee. We meet the 4th Thursday of every month. So at the next, it's the 3rd Thursday of every month. The next meeting, I'm going to do an education session with them and go through all those documents. They've had them, they've read them, but go through and give them a summary of everything and kind of almost do a miniature soup session on that education component. So then they can go out and talk to their neighbors and residents about the different topics as well. So that's the summary of the soup sessions. So coming out of that, we really didn't see any of the priorities changing from what we saw come out of the community meeting. So everything that you're going to see on these slides, you've already seen in that 1-page document, but I think it's important to go through them and understand what they mean from a high level, knowing that as we prioritize them and work through them, we will start putting more meat on the bones and developing how we would implement each of these. And that will be the next step after you prioritize them. So the first one, and these are in no order, so it's not like we've ranked them in any order ourselves coming into this meeting.
Can I interrupt just for a moment?
Yeah.
So how do you envision this conversation unfolding? Do you want us to talk about each one? Do you
I
want to walk through them all
Yep.
and then talk about them?
want to walk through them all. And then at the very end, I have a slide that has all of them on one slide. And I think at that point is when we're going to start talking about which ones do you think rise to the top?
We have questions about words or phrases on these documents.
Ask them now as we go.
Okay,
Ask
that's
the
fine.
questions now. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So balanced growth and development. So we heard a lot about promoting low density development. Again, that goes back to the education that residents might not understand that there's sewer coming. They might not understand that maintaining large lot size when you have sewers can have some repercussions from the court side of things of not providing the proper zoning for that. So we have to have some continued education on that. But understanding that there's a desire for that rural atmosphere as we move forward.
So I'm going to comment here.
Yep.
Rural atmosphere is different than low density. And so I was doing some research on rural density versus suburban density versus urban density. And rural density is basically 0.1 to 2 units per acre scattered across an agricultural area with residential coming in as second. So it's basically an agricultural community with residences. That's who we have been. I don't think that's who we are becoming. Urban density is 1 to 5,000 people, or up, 10,000 people per square mile. And where we clearly fall in the zoning that we've already put in place is that we are going to be a suburban community. Now, we may describe ourselves as not an inner suburban community, but an outer suburban community. But that's typically housing ranges from 2 to 10 units per acre. So in some portions of the township, there may still be that agricultural density somewhere, but that's not going to be the majority of the township.
So,
Am I accurate?
You're 100% spot on. So I think that goes back to where I mentioned that we have to have that education, right?
Yes.
The low density and the large lot sizes are not feasible when you have sewer coming. So educating residents on that. But then focusing on that rural atmosphere as far as it's the feel as you drive down the road, it still feels like it's rural, because what we've done with the cluster conservation zoning is to let that density cluster, but preserve 50% of that open space. Then put that 50% open spaces in key locations. Maybe it's down the road. So as you drive down your road, you're buffered by the large masses of green space on each side, and then the developments behind it. So you don't see that suburban style development as you're driving through. Maybe it's clustering, 50% here of one development next to 50% of the next development over, so that you now have large masses of adjacent open space. And then you keep it in that agricultural theme, rural theme. You don't make mounds, you don't make the suburban style development. You make it feel like it is today, even though the density might be clustered somewhere.
So as part of our education process, I think it's understanding density sometimes communicates the wrong thing. Density is not necessarily bad.
Correct.
And so I would prefer smart density.
Mhm.
I put down distributed density or appropriate density versus low density. As I think low density communicates an unrealistic expectation.
I agree. And I think what we're reporting here is what we heard. And
Yes,
now what we need to do
And I'm
is turn it
countering.
around,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And say, we heard the residents say this,
right.
but as we've talked through it, we're changing it to be more realistic, to reflect what you want to see, but in a way that's feasible within the community.
Yeah, I love the rural atmosphere. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you achieve smart, appropriate density with a rural atmosphere?
There, two of you have any comments on that?
Well, is that gonna fall into the conservation subdivision kind of situation?
That is where we were going with the conservation overlay district. Does it mean that we need to look at anything, tweak anything? You know, we may realize that as we go over time, but yes, that was the original intent of that conservation overlay. And then also part of this, the residents want to make sure that growth supports the infrastructure. And that goes back to tying our development to those economic development tools, tying it to a joint economic development district, a new community authority, TIFs, and all the other ABCs of economic development. So I think that some of that will come out through Dana's plan with Montrose at the county level. But knowing that we have different ways that we can generate revenue and offset the infrastructure cost. I often hear the term pay as you grow, so that it's clear that new residents are paying to come and live in the township, and that's not being becoming a burden to the existing tax base and the existing residents. And then also making sure funds for public services, I think that kind of all goes into that bucket of funding and growth and economic development tools. And then finally, respecting community values. I think that's huge. And I think that as we go through this, defining what those values are, is it the rural atmosphere? What are those values to help us adequately plan and make sure that that vision for the community is being adhered to. Questions before we go on? So the next one is the next one is the rural lifestyle and autonomy. So again, you're seeing that rural atmosphere, that rural nature come out in the conversations. And I think right along with that is the autonomy of the township. So not only supporting property rights, but also keeping and maintaining the form of township government. And making sure that as a township resident, they are maintaining the lifestyle that they have today as far as what rights they have and being able to be supported by your trustees. So I think that's, you know, stemming from previous conversations of, you know, potential mergers and making sure that we're going down a road that protects the autonomy of the township.
How do you feel like, how do you interpret property rights coming up in this conversation?
I'm pretty sure that it probably revolved around, I want to be able to shoot my gun. I want to be able to still do have agriculture on my property. Those sorts of things I think are what we were hearing, and we've turned that into, these are your property rights that you have as a township resident, but sometimes municipalities, you don't have those rights.
Yeah.
If I was a trustee looking at these in 10 years, I would wonder, why did you put rural lifestyle and autonomy together?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we've really been using autonomy as more autonomy of governance. Whereas lifestyle to me is more what are the what's the residents' quality of life? And I wonder if these would be better separated.
I think the quality of life to them, though, is this property rights side of things, which relates back to the autonomy of a township. I think that's how it's being tied together. We could potentially expand upon this to explain that more.
Yeah, when I refer to autonomy, I'm thinking about maintaining the integrity of our geography and and our identity in our culture and community. Does that play with rural lifestyle a little bit, perhaps?
I think it does.
I think it's the
Yes.
Yeah,
new version.
okay.
Okay. Next is community engagement and collaboration. We actually used this one at our last community meeting. It broke into groups and had the small groups start to build out this one. I didn't put those results in here. You have that handout. I passed it on at a previous meeting. But I think it's important to kind of note that we've been talking at a deeper level already with the residents on the community engagement. I think that as we talk through this, trust is a huge one that is coming up in the conversations. Transparency, making sure that residents understand what's being considered and how the township is moving forward. We heard a lot that they believe that it has improved over the last few months, that there is still room for improvement. They gave us ideas on how to better communicate and get and advertise meetings, as far as not your trustees meetings, but special meetings that we're having to help with the strategic planning process. And those ideas have been communicated to Lindsay, and Lindsay is working on that through her communications committee. But I think that there was a strong sense of, making sure there's communication, not only with you as trustees and the residents, but also with the local and regional entities. And again, I think that's been, happening more lately as well. And those reports out at, trustee meetings and at the community meetings. So making sure that all of that information is being provided to the residents.
It's both internal and external.
Yes.
I like those words.
Okay.
Uh,
Yep, we can add that. Anything else on that one? Okay. Preservation and sustainability, making sure that the environment is being protected. That could be done through open spaces and other practices. Making sure that sustainability is built into the development process, and then maintaining an agricultural economy. I think that is something that needs to be brought to Dana's attention. And how are there ways to integrate agriculture into an economic development plan? And are there industries that could potentially be tapped into as businesses that could be thought of, from your agricultural technical side of things, of building machinery, building your tech side of things? Are those kinds of industries that we could look at? So I think it's something to have a conversation with Dana about on that. So not only just the farming, but what other support businesses could be targeted.
Question, do we have an agricultural economy in Harlem Township? Can you answer that question?
getting less by the year.
How would you define our agricultural economy? What percentage of our economy is agricultural?
Not that much. I mean, there's probably only 3 good-sized farmers in the township, and they have to go out of the township to find enough land to farm. But a tractor and planter costs as much as what most people's houses cost. And that's just 2 pieces of equipment. You still gotta have the combine to harvest, the trucks and everything else. And land disappearing, land being too expensive, it's a losing game.
So if we have a lot of land that's being farmed by percentage wise, but we have 3 big farmers.
Pretty much.
And so I just calculate that and so maintain an agricultural economy when the agricultural economy is going the way of all flesh.
Are we thinking about the big grain farms? We're not
Yes.
Thinking about smaller, organic vegetable farming or any of these other, aqua farming or anything that is also an agricultural economy that could be developed here.
So
As the grain farmers get reduced.
Steve?
Steve,
I find that you're almost implying the way that's written that it exists now. And I think it's misleading.
Yeah.
To people to say that as it is up there, because it doesn't exist.
Right.
And there could be new avenues. And maybe agricultural economy isn't even the right description, right? But
if we grab what you're talking about, Jenny, let's say you've got a 5 or 10 acre piece of ground and you want to use that to produce items that would be of great value to our residents in a market in Center Village someday. And so we had any number of people in our township that wanted to do that. So then it would be, how do we creatively support an agricultural, I'm not word that supports our residents.
Value added.
cultural ventures.
It is venues,
Ventures.
ventures.
Agricultural ventures.
Yeah, as we recognize, the big farms are going to go away, but we'd love to see these kinds of ventures. So capturing that differently.
Supporting rather than maintaining.
My, Bob, go ahead and I'll add some 2 cents.
I think perception is that we have an agricultural.
Right, which exactly, it goes back to that.
And I mean, you drive down the road and it may be the horse farm, the polo,
Mhm.
but it's a wide open space.
Right.
And if a house is back 200 feet, you have all that open space. So when someone drives through the township, they still look at it, I think.
And this is similar to my concerns at this point, right? Is I feel like we've got some catchphrases in here. Rural comes up a lot
Yeah.
without the true definition of really what that is, agricultural. And I think, these are all important words, but I don't know how apropos they are in the moment and in the scenario. For example, other countries who have run out of land to grow their own food turn to hydroponic solutions to be able to produce this. And so what that looks like is a 6-story concrete building in the middle of a field. I don't know that anybody thinks that's what Harlan Township should look like, right? Yet that is an agricultural industry. So to me, I feel like each slide that I have seen so far, and this could just be my opinion, has referenced the same mentality of we want to drive down 605 and just see fields.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and that's what we were hearing at the meetings, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we're reporting back on what we're hearing at the meetings.
Mhm.
So we as a group here now need to reframe that into what we think is actually reality. So,
I think it's also a matter of whoever you're talking to and hearing what their definition of what you're saying, maintain agricultural economy. You probably talk to 10 people and 5 of them would have different opinions of what that means.
Right. Because it's a catchphrase.
Just like,
Yeah.
just like Dave's saying, we've got farms going on up there, 3 big farmers. I can tell you that when those big farmers sell their property for the amount of money they're gonna get out of their property, that guy's not gonna come farm that.
And so when you talk to Mary Manhattan with Preservation Parks, and they're talking about getting a space, and typically they want to deal with 100 acres or more that they're looking to invest in. They want to preserve that space, and they want to preserve it without buildings if possible, so that it has paths. It's very much going into a nature kind of setting. And I'd say, well, we would love to have those kinds of spaces in Harlem Township. And so if we're talking about that, yeah, let's have that, and let's have it connected by pathways, biking and walking all across the township. That's not open fields with grain, but that's preserving natural spaces for the enjoyment of our residents in a very strategic, planned, smart way that maintains the character of the township.
So for example, that first bullet, it could be work to develop instead of preserving, because that implies it's already there. So the thinking is kind of, Adam, to your point, kind of going forward, which is, develop plans for common spaces for community use, right? I mean, just so that, you're talking about there's a need to build on some things. There may be some space already that we've got, but I mean, the only open space that we own, I think, is the park, right?
Yeah, I think further definition is what's required in something like that, right? Like, I mean, if we need to protect the environment, quote unquote, I mean, there are multiple ways to do that rather than just blocking off acreages of land. You go to Silicon Valley, and most of those multi-$10,000 office and tech buildings have gardens and green spaces on the roofs.
Right.
They're protecting the environment in that situation because they're providing habitat for butterflies and bees and all the other pollinators in the world, right? So there's lots of different ways to do that. I'm not proposing that we have, the next Apple ring in.
I'm picturing a
Harlem
6-story concrete building
with a garden on the roof. Exactly. It'd be beautiful.
Oh,
And we
boy.
could paint it sky blue and you'd never even know it was
It
there.
would look like a silo.
Yeah.
I mean, Holly, you're doing a good job representing what people were telling you.
Yeah, that's
Like,
right.
we gotta keep remembering that that's
It's-
what.
right.
But then the question is,
How do we?
how much of it do you guys want to embrace?
Right.
I love the
and
words.
internalize and repeat back, or are you just misleading people by doing that?
And just because you made the comment, Steve, like I feel like it's important to emphasize. Personally, I don't want it to be a situation where it turns into the BOT is dictating what the strategic initiatives are. I feel like our responsibility here is to distill the information here and determine what the community thinks that the priorities are. I think that after these first handful of slides, I feel like that's going to be a little bit difficult because I've seen the same couple of things reiterated with different words, and some of those things just frankly cannot come true.
Exactly.
So that puts the board in a little bit of a tricky spot because we have to bring it into what's real.
That's why it's important that those meetings, whoever's doing those meetings, having those conversations with people. saying,
Agreed, yeah.
That can't happen.
And that's why that
Because I can
education.
tell you, I get a lot of calls about those meetings. Just as much as before saying they knew nothing about it, they're not getting transparency.
Mhm.
But, so I take the time to explain it to them, but they don't understand the basic policies. Now, whether they're just not remembering it or whether they've heard it 100 times and forget it, I don't know, but I can tell you it is not a slam dunk. We're getting the point across because we're not.
Concur, yeah.
Oh. First couple of meetings basically have been exploratory
Right.
and getting the feedback from the people, not the people feeding back to them.
Right.
Okay, well,
Right.
other people in the township don't know that, Bob. What I'm saying. So that needs to be put out
And
there,
that should
right?
be communicated.
Exactly. You guys should
Okay.
communicate that when you're at those meetings.
I would say that I think both those points of view are correct. I think my personal opinion is based on the past, 12 months of life in Harlem Township, I would have assumed we'd all be a little bit more educated than what I'm experiencing at the meetings. call that an assumption, right? It is what it is, but I had hoped there'd be a higher level of acumen, but we can adjust to that, right? We can continue to educate and we can do that the best we can, but there is a level here where the community has to seek out that information rather than rely on us to feed it to them by mail
Yes.
every
Yes.
week.
So I absolutely love the words on this slide, that preservation and sustainability. I think that's a great priority, but how that's defined is going to be very different than how it's currently defined.
Yep.
And this may mean that in one of our public meetings, I think it's okay for us to work on prioritizing these and offer clarity to them
Yes.
on the residents' behalf. I don't view that as dictating. I view that as informing.
Yeah,
But-
fair.
I think we have to boil down the rural atmosphere to the 2025 definition, not what
Not,
it was
right.
20 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Right.
I mean, if anybody's lived out here very long, they would have seen what happened down the road 6 mile 5, 6 years ago, but obviously they haven't. So, we got to get this across about rural atmospheres, something different than what they've been looking at, and how to develop things smartly, like you said. And it's what, with all this planning, I'm hoping it's going to happen.
Right.
Joe?
Yeah, I think in the comprehensive plan, for the strategic plan, we're appraisal centric. And rural does mean, as everybody pointed out, could mean many different things to many different people. I think one question the groups would be, what qualities of life do you appreciate from rural? To me, it's a little slower pace, property rights, and the open space. But I think if you ask them to pinpoint, what they're talking about, I think even in the strategic plan, setbacks from roads have been established to keep the rural feel, as Holly says. When you're driving by, if there's a cluster development and you live in that development, you're going to choose to live there. But there's a lot of developments where people living in the surrounding community will never go there unless they're visiting somebody or live there. So it is visual. And then on the environmental friendly, I mean, stormwater treatment is huge, right? And the more urban you get, the more stormwater concrete pipes you have everywhere. Dave, you and I talked about sidewalks on streets. What is environmental friendly? And it's going to be the most apparent on how you address new growth and the standards it develops to, because this is all about dealing with new growth, but how can you bring the qualities that people appreciate from rural living? But I think you might want to get the top 2 or 3 or 4 answers of what that means to people.
I think that's
Yeah.
actually a really good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Ed?
Okay, so while we're talking about the agricultural economy, I was just thinking, previously we mentioned small businesses, so I just ran over in my memory what's happening in the neighborhood. There's at least 2 residences that sell flowers. They have stands by the road. We got Lettuce Works, commercial flower. We got that, there's that lot on 605 sells pumpkins. We got the fish farm. We got several sheep, razors. We got horses, cattle, goats, chickens, turkeys, guinea fowl. There's several vegetable stands, small ones, bees. I think we have an economy that speaks to a rural nature and agricultural nature. in total, it might not be that large. But I wouldn't mind seeing that expand, and someone else referenced that, encouraging that type of small agricultural, effort here.
Yeah, we talked about supporting agricultural ventures. I used the word value added. And changing this to be more forward thinking and
I think you can incentivize that, Ed. How can we incentivize that?
Yeah, I think there probably is a way to do that.
Yeah, how can we welcome people who want to do that and think, hey, Harlem Township would be a great place to do that?
There was a plot on Center Village that started just before COVID, and they were raising garlic and selling it to local restaurants. Well, COVID killed that venture, but that was like a little truck farm.
Mhm.
and not to keep going back to the quick strategy guide, but it does call for, you know, in the center village, having some kind of aggregation place that would support these
Absolutely.
types of ventures. So I think there's bits and pieces that have been touched on already that we just need to expand on further.
Right.
All right, moving on to safety and well-being, making sure that the community state continues with low crime and that there's strong public services, that there's a family-friendly environment with affordable living and good schools. Again, what is affordable? How do we define that? And I think that everybody would probably have a different definition of that.
Do we want the word multifamily or no, intergenerational?
I think we should.
Intergenerational, just so that Harlem Township can be a place for first-time homeowners. It can also be a place that you come to in your 20s or 30s, but you can retire to in your 60s and 70s and never have to leave. Because there's been an environment created where there's housing across the board that's available. Oh, in a walkable community.
Any thoughts on the safety aspect of it as we move forward into a growing community?
Slower speed limits, roundabouts, bike paths, get bikes off the road.
And so then like the slower speed limit, you have to lean into townships don't have as much
Sure.
ability
Right.
to regulate speeds.
Right.
So you're going to ODOT every time you want to reduce the speed of a road and doing a study
Right.
for that. So
They don't do that easily.
what's that?
They don't do
No.
lower the speed limits easily. We've done that on township roads and been turned down many times.
Yeah.
Is that still the case if you're under home rule?
So we were just talking about that as a group today. So under limited home rule, you have some ability on some township roads, but when it comes to county and state roads.
It still goes through.
Safety also.
Yeah.
No police.
Police, right.
But we all know, we can lower every one of these streets to 35. If there's nobody to
There's
enforce
no
it, it ain't
enforcement.
happening.
Right.
Yeah.
They just blow through Center Village at 55 mile an hour, 25 foot from the stop sign. So
I live in a neighborhood with a dead end on the end of my street. People are still flying down and going at least 35 or 40 while we're on the sidewalk 2 feet from the road. I mean, if people don't want to slow down, they're not going to slow down. ODOT's not going to change that. It's human nature,
signs are not gonna stop them.
sadly enough.
Community identity and pride. There's the rural word again, going back to the roots, celebrating the history, and then creating the brand and historical awareness. So kind of touching on what Trustee Trainer talked about of how does the township identify itself and how do we show folks that they're entering into Harlem Township? What separates you from the rest of the area? And then I think this is the last one, establish a village center. Create a centralized place in Harlem Township that serves as a gathering place for residents with increased density and additional local businesses. And again, we do have that in the quick strategy guide, but how does that play out? And how do we move forward with that? So further defining that. Oh, nope, we do have one more. Vibrancy and quality of life. I think quality of life, we kind of touched on one of the others too. But some of the things that we heard were recreational spaces, a clean environment, diverse commercial development, high quality of life.
Seems like all those fit in on other slides.
I agree.
You think so, Steve? You're
Yeah.
shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm sitting here, again, I'm respecting the process of what Holly's been asked to report back on. But I sit here and ask myself a little bit of, well, so what? Or, okay, given that, these feel like statements of value, things people value and or would like to environmentally surround themselves with. And there's gonna be a lot of different things that different people are gonna want, and there's a wide spectrum, and so then, you know, you say, okay, well, what would you do about it? What are some of the steps you would take to actually make that happen? And I don't, first of all, I fully support the solicitation of the input. I mean, I think if you went back and looked at the quick strategy guide, you'd find every one of these in it.
Well,
Okay, so I'm wary of bringing that up because it kind of takes us back to the past, but it's kind of all in there. So then what are you gonna do? You know, Adam, you said, well, it's really not up to the board to necessarily take action on it. That's probably true, but I think what we're trying to do is come up with a plan, a strategy guide that helps drive, because what exists, that isn't gonna change. So what we're looking for, and John, you know, between the economic development plan that you're talking about, the strategic committee's input but how do we want, as the sewer comes along, what are the steps we want to take to drive development the way we want to see it done?
Right.
I mean, you know, we've had the benefit of having some developers talk to us about that. I'm all for education. I mean, and I'm not knocking that, but the real education opportunity will become is when you guys go plant a flag about a new development that, you know, is going to get approved, taking advantage of the overlay district in the south. And we're going to do, you know, 3 houses per acre, but 50% is going to be set aside for green space. That's when people will start coming out of the woodwork, and you'll start, and that's when there will be an opportunity for education. I mean, we got to keep hammering. I mean, Mike just wrote a great piece for the newsletter. I mean, it was Overlay 101. I wonder how many of our people actually read that. All right. Prior to that, there was the zoning 101. There was the what is annexation? You know, Holly, when you're doing your soup bowl kitchen things, you should ask people, you know, have they been to any previous meetings? And have they read the last 3 newsletters, quarterly newsletters that came out, right? And do they even know they exist, or are they throwing them away? We're emailing monthly, 650 now, I think, monthly updates to people every month, which are really pretty complete. Lindsay's doing a hell of a job. I mean, you think about where we were a year ago. Yeah, the emails. So I'm sorry for the speed. I'm just trying to get to the kind of, when you know this stuff, okay, what are we going to do with it? And what's actionable?
I think the beauty, when we took these priorities and start to say, okay, now how do we implement them? And Holly's team did that with the communication piece, and then they created a whole outline. Here's what this looks like in action.
Yep.
So each one of these priorities has to be dealt with in that manner,
Yep.
in the how-to, the methodology. You know, what's the big idea? So I think that's the next step in this process
next
after we prioritize them. But I think there's still a continuing education piece that I understand your frustration.
No, it's
I
just
went-
reality.
I went to a couple of the soup kitchens and people just don't know.
Don't.
They don't.
It-
And yet, I'm sorry, you have to manage their expectations too,
Yes.
because the one thing I do remember when I first got here is Holly did a really good job of explaining it to, can't remember who it was she was explaining it to, that everybody came and said, we don't want this. Well, and I'm sure you still are explaining that, well, we can't just say that, we're gonna get sued.
Right.
We're gonna not have a township then.
Right.
It doesn't work.
So those expectations need to be managed from the people and all their ideas and everything. We'd love to have every one of those things, but in the real world, it's probably not.
And John, we gotta keep,
Yeah.
there's no question, education and communication still a high priority. But we also need to not say we gotta get everybody educated before we make some decisions about what we want to do on the developmental side or move some initiatives forward, whatever those might be. And those steps will create an abundance of opportunities for further education, because that's when people's eyes are going.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think that's why when we talk as a steering committee, that's our next step, is to create those educational sessions. And the steering committee themselves, I mean, they admit they were not educated when they came in. They were green and they are learning
Yeah.
as they go.
We got some in the chat.
Darlene Maygold and Louis Greenwell asked a question for Holly. When did you pull the soup session feedback to create the summary?
I believe it was pulled last week. All right. There we go. So that is the last one. So these are the priorities as far as how the community identified them. So the thought process tonight was that we would identify the order of them, or if they need to go away, for example, the vibrancy and quality of life probably could be rolled into something else. So maybe that goes away and gets rolled up. So I think once you identify which ones make sense to you in the order, then we will probably pick the top 4 or 5 to put the meat on the bones for our next meeting with the community.
They responded with the deadline mentioned today.
Okay, correct.
And they put in one last night that.
Okay,
maybe
then
was
that would
maybe-
not be in yet. That would not be in our summary, but we will make sure that it is pulled. Lindsay knew today was the deadline. So we will make sure we get that. So thank you for putting one in. We appreciate it.
Gentlemen, any comments on all the topics that Holly's mentioned?
You want us to start taking a shot at this?
Well, might as well.
See if we're. So I will posit that number 1 is rural lifestyle and autonomy, but that rural lifestyle needs clarification.
John, what did you call it earlier? Sub road?
Yeah, no, that you have rural, suburban, and urban. We are suburban. And we're not an interior suburban. We're more of an exterior or boundary suburban community. And that's by definition what we are.
And I use the term rural atmosphere of making it feel like it is today, but maybe it isn't what it is today. It's a developed area, but it feels more like this. the aesthetic. I like that.
I almost feel like there's an opportunity here to differentiate between strategic priorities and actionable items.
Okay.
Case in point, right? Like if we're identifying strategic priorities, aka with the spirit of how we want to move forward with the development and growth of the township, I agree with John. I think, that I'll use the word rural, and autonomous viewpoint of Harlem Township is historically has been the most important thing.
Yep.
Take it back a year ago, everybody said we don't want to be Westerville, we want to be Harlem Township. Okay, let's figure out ways to make sure that we can continue to do that. On the other side of that coin, right? If we talk about actionable items, establishing a village center, that seems very actionable to me. In fact, I feel like a lot of diligence and work has already been done
Mm-hmm.
for that. So if we wanted to kind of parallel this conversation, I would almost I kind of feel like that's the most important, the highest priority actionable item, because work has already been done, but also because I feel like having that established village center would accomplish a lot of these other things. Sort of like identity, vibrance, and some other things like that. I mean, I will admit, for the first time in my life, I went to Lithopolis today. Am I saying that right? Lithopolis? Is it really? Should have come over.
Yeah, shut up.
I have never been there before. Been in a canal plenty of times, right? But never actually in Lithopolis.
Yeah.
Okay. Bebelheimer, Bebelheimer.
Right.
And my first thought when I passed into it and looked at all the cornfield was, I wonder where the middle of this town is. Where's their township hall, right? I don't know that I ever found it. I did go past a really cool, like, service station, convenience store. Can't remember the name of it.
Bootsies.
Bootsies, that was it. So, but this just came to my mind again today, is like, I think that is really a big opportunity for us. We have the sort of default center just because 605 and Center Village cross, but to be able to really turn that into something that we can all identify with and that identifies us seems to be the most important actionable item. As far as strategic priorities, no, highest priority, I agree with John's statements. I think embracing what we've all been saying for the last 12, 13, 14 months is probably number one.
So I agree with Adam. I think it's very hard. I love the differentiation between priority and action item.
Yeah.
I think it's a great differentiation. Recognizing that what we would be creating is a vision, because the infrastructure will not get there first.
Right.
But that vision will inform where the infrastructure does get to, which is the southwest corner. So I agree.
And I'll give it to you, Dave, but you just brought that up, and that was another thing. On one of your slides, Holly, the statement, I believe, is the growth should support the infrastructure. Should it not be the other way around? Should the infrastructure not support the growth that we want to see?
So we're talking about cost when we say, so I agree with you that the infrastructure needs to support what we're growing to be. And it needs to be, roads need to be wide enough, sewers need to accommodate.
Right.
Yes, that, I agree with that.
Okay.
But so maybe we need to reword the slide a little bit, but what that means is the cost should be not given to the residents.
Right. Okay.
I agree 100% with Adam on the village. That's something that we mentioned back in the comprehensive when that was done, back in 21 or whatever. And that's what we were looking forward to accomplish, to bring all these overlays together to a center point. The infrastructure, the new growth has got to pay for that. We've talked about that. With all the different instruments that can be enacted to do that. The TIFs, the JEDs, the CEDAs and all that kind of thing to get that going. The community engagement, that's been a lifetime challenge.
And that almost to me feels like an actionable item as well.
Yeah.
I concur.
Okay. So do you think that should be number 2, or are we not numbering
Under action items?
action items? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, as a strategic priority, I would say something like maintaining healthy internal and external relationships. That's more of a priority that would drive future trustees to think about how are we communicating, and how are we collaborating, et cetera.
You said maintaining internal and external
Relationships, healthy relationships. I call them redemptive. Do I have redemptive relationships in my life, both internally and externally? Do we as a community have these? How are we maintaining them?
As far as that goes, the rural atmosphere, land prices is gonna drive that. When mom and pop are doing their thing on their 5 acres and they pass on or no longer to do it, their children probably don't have any interest in that. They're probably working in town, maybe working at Intel. And they're gonna look at the value of the land, it's gonna get sold.
Right. So that goes back to making it feel more, creating that aesthetic, creating the atmosphere. Because we know it's not going to stay
Right.
that way.
So we established that rural lifestyle and autonomy was one
Mm-hmm.
for priorities.
Mhm.
What about for two? Could we say I put smart growth and development versus
I would
balance?
agree to that.
Smart growth. Can I substitute one word there?
Yep,
Without
absolutely.
imposing anything?
Yep.
Would you use smart or intentional?
Both. It's one of those.
You think so?
I think smart's a little bit bigger.
Number one is rural lifestyle and autonomy. And then number two, are we going with smart or intentional or both?
Smart's kind of the in vogue word.
Yeah, but intention
Yeah.
is what you tend to do.
Yeah.
So both?
Yeah.
You can say both, but I
Smart,
think, yeah, smart's just too clever.
smart growth can mean sustainable growth. It can mean from an environmental perspective, it can mean smart growth from an economic perspective. So you can define smart in different ways. You can also define intentional, but I think that I think intentional is a little stronger as far
Then use it.
as, okay.
Yeah, intentional.
Use smart in the, is this acronomical, as an acronym, or specific, measurable?
Mhm. Yeah. There you go.
We'll do that, just for us.
So intentional growth and development. And then did you want the maintaining internal and external healthy relationships under the priority?
I would, but I would defer to these guys if they think that's good.
Say it again.
Maintaining internal and external healthy relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
Yeah,
share and stakeholder conversation has been one that
I
has
think
been
you have to
ongoing.
do that.
So that would be number
Together.
3 then?
I think it needs to be up there.
Yep.
Okay.
Maintaining healthy internal and external relationships.
I personally think preservation and sustainability can fall under the intentional growth and development. I think that one can just fold under.
Maintaining internal and external.
Healthy relationships.
So we're going to fold preservation and sustainability under
Intentional
Intentional?
growth and development. If that's what you got, that's what I was suggesting. If that,
Well, that's because that's exactly what it is, right?
yep.
community identity and pride. Does that become number 4?
To me, that one is your priority that you're establishing village center kind of falls, your action item falls under.
I see establishing, in my opinion, establishing a village center as the first action
Right.
of that action plan.
Yeah,
Under community identity and pride.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
community pride and brand.
Okay. Village center. And then we have safety and well-being.
You know, and I assume that's the kind of thing that needs to be said, although it should be assumed, because I don't think anyone is going to try to develop a community to the alternative,
Yeah,
but we probably have to put the words in the guide.
When
Is
future,
it-
when future trustees are spending more money on roads or more money on signage or more money on a bike path versus,
or chartering a.
And they can
police
say, well,
department.
here's why we're doing it, because this is a priority.
All of them, right?
So we ended up with 5.
5, correct.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna read them back just to make sure I have them how you have them. I have number 1 as rural lifestyle and autonomy. Number 2, intentional growth and development. Number 3, maintaining internal and external healthy relationships. Number 4, community identity and pride. And number 5, safety and well-being.
Yeah, but I don't think we can use the word rural. I really don't
Okay.
at this point.
Yeah. I don't
To
think
go out
so
and
either.
publish the word rural as our
Yeah,
number
good
1
time to
priority.
Stop using.
That you
Yeah.
just, we gotta stop using it.
Right.
Um, and we're just gonna have to inform,
Yep.
That alone might provoke some discussion,
Yeah,
which is fine.
which
Yeah.
that's an educational opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, and it might be an opportunity to start that uncomfortable transition into using the word suburban. However, I don't know that it's as simple as a one-word solution, right? Like, I mean, we could identify our intention here to, you know, and embrace development in the characteristics of Harlem Township's traditional agricultural lifestyle, right?
traditional, yep,
So, but like, that's not one word, that's many.
right.
So, but you know, I mean, you could wordsmith that in any way that you want to. I think in a lot of ways, like this goes back to the education of our community again. Like it's not rural. You know?
The people that are living here are living an urban lifestyle in Harlem Township. They are.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
only a few people that are living an agricultural
Right.
lifestyle. And so nobody should be uncomfortable with that word.
Right.
Joe, what do you think?
I don't know, just a suggestion, encourage rural characteristics in new development. That part of the new development. And it would go a long way to the theme of what Harlem Township and how it's going to develop.
How does New Albany describe their style, their plan?
It was a thoroughly master plan community, top to bottom. There's only a couple of developers that developed there.
But when they're wrestling with,
It was like, you go back to Jack Kessler, when Les Wexler said, I wanna build a house out in the country, right? And then what does that feel like? And then they did adopt a very strong architectural team, Georgian, and that master plan, everything was designed to meet and complement.
Well, and don't get me wrong, right? Like comparing the different drives between right down the center of New Albany, you know, past Starbucks, compared to a little bit further down 605, getting closer to Morse Road, like that's a little bit of a different feel. I don't think anybody would describe New Albany as rural, but they certainly wouldn't describe it as urban. I mean, I lived in Lexington, Kentucky for a year and a half of my life, and we got the same white fences around horse farms, right? Like that's not urban. There's Paris, Kentucky. You guys Google it.
No, I
The same fence, right? So, I just wonder what sort of words they're using.
what's the nomenclature? What's the
Luxury farm.
new urban? Is it new
New
urban?
urban.
But you're right, I mean, they put the Georgian look to the center,
They had certain key elements.
and whereas I would say,
Tradition.
if you're trying to find a word to replace rural, that maybe it's more country.
Yes.
So when you look at the new houses that have been built in Harlem Township,
If you look at the overlay districts.
yes,
And the design aesthetic that's in there. And the architectural guidelines for it, it's not Georgian,
no,
right? It's peaked roofs with beams, and
Right.
it's country,
Modern farm.
so it's modern farmhouse, contemporary farmhouse.
right?
It's
Yeah.
American Farmhouse 2.0. So the words traditional or country,
Little bit-
country
A
lifestyle?
little bit country, a little bit rock and roll.
Yeah, it's a country suburb. It's an
I think
external
that's why
suburb.
people are coming here. They're moving to the country. To some extent, they're moving out of the city.
I almost,
I mean, those may not be the technical terms people use for describing it, John, but
Mhm.
to me, that might be a transitional
Holly,
method.
part of me wants to run it by Lindsay and her team,
Yeah,
you know, all
That-
those marketers. And see
yeah,
what-
and we'll run it by Angela too
Oh, yeah.
and see what she thinks.
So words like traditional or country.
Is there something else in the chat?
Same one.
Okay.
I did look to see what words for New Albany are. You were asking what their
Yeah.
like big words are. New Albany, Ohio is affluent. It is a master plan referred to intentional and organized development, picturesque due to the Georgian architecture, suburban,
Suburb.
upscale, highlighting a high-end home, amenities and school system, and family-friendly, emphasizing its focus on community, education, and safety.
Yeah, and I think before anybody gets to thinking that we're trying to be like New Albany, I think we're just trying to be, we're trying to have the same vocabulary as all.
What we want is we do want to have the same smart planning that New Albany has. So the word suburban, I don't think we should run from that word.
Same.
I think it's a word that we should embrace and define.
Mhm.
So if you want to say traditional suburban, country suburban, whatever, that's what we are.
I like country.
I do like country,
Yeah, that might work.
country suburban. That's a nice transition. In 20 years, they can change it and drop the country. I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay,
All right.
good.
Go one last time.
Suggestion, because the priority list that you've developed, to Steve's point and to the education point, the township has done a lot on all those fronts. And I don't know when you go back to the groups that economic, you passed it to your relationships you're developing with the other communities in the county, and all those are in place. The preservation development that is already inherent in the overlays that kind of show, it's like maybe help bring everybody up to speed on what's been done. There might be adjustments, but that's just a suggestion when you're presenting these back, and these are the steps that have been taken over the last 3 years. The goals aren't dissimilar, right? Yeah.
All right.
We good? Anything else?
I think we are if you are.
Good.
Yep, I'm
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, Steve.
Well, not unrelated, but so as I think about what has been done that has gotten approved with the overlays. We've got the southern half of the township done, right? Center District South. And that's a combination of multiple different overlays. We've now kind of bracketed up to the east and now across the north side. But we've still got a huge piece that is sort of left untouched right now, right? As far as, I mean, it's zoned, right? And so that in itself is there. But I guess what I wonder is, and that's at this point, the furthest from any sewer connection that we can currently dream of. And that's what certainly drove us to get the southern part done first. Should we be doing something, somehow classifying or putting some cloud over that remainder? That the reason for that is for the suburban country aesthetic, right? I mean, and I know we can't necessarily don't want to be dictating acreages and I mean, that's a real mix up and through that area of FR1, AR1, I think, as I remember, right?
Yeah.
But do you guys think there's anything, or Holly, do you think we should be trying to put some kind of a frame, because then we would have a framework cloud sitting on the entirety of the township that at least we could refer people to.
I'm not sure how realistic somebody would pull that down without having the sewer, and I don't see the sewer getting there in the next few years.
Yeah,
So,
no, I, so,
Comprehensive plan. Yes. I'd say.
that's true. I mean, yeah, so if we think that's descriptive, yeah, okay, well, maybe
Yeah.
that is enough.
I think it's
I
enough.
mean, that's, in my mind, that's kind of the gap
Yeah.
of providing guidance right now.
I agree, it's the gap, but I think that this plan will inform how to get there. And I think that once we get this done, then we move to
Yeah,
that.
no, I'm,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you for at least hearing.
Okay.
Are you good, Holly?
I am good, thank you.
Okay. Um, so on the May 10th, 2025 strategic planning meeting, I'm sure that we'll provide an update of this conversation and continued education around these topics to those who are in attendance. I did reach out to the Delaware County Foundation and did not hear back from them after repeated attempts. Just want to know that's an ongoing attempt. And I did have a conversation with Preservation Parks that I referenced earlier, and I think inviting Mary Van Hatten to come and present to us would be very helpful. We need to have a vision for the Harlem Township Park System that includes both preservation of space, but also what I'm going to call space that's dedicated to recreation. Okay, recreation. There's a difference between amusement. Amuse means to not think. You go to an amusement park, so you don't have to think. You go to a place where you recreate so that you think well. You recreate yourself. And we need spaces like that that are dedicated to recreation. So come on now.
You have support.
So both preservation and sustainability of green space, but recreation kind of spaces. That we think about our 26 square miles in this context and connectivity throughout to Center Village, future schools, et cetera. So these are big thoughts that we need to be having as a township, and there are outside resources that can help us think those big thoughts and want to think alongside with us. So for example, Mary said Trenton is engaged right now in a huge addition to their bike paths up there. And wouldn't it be smart for us to connect to what they're doing in Trenton so that they're not disparate? And absolutely, we should connect so that people can start in Harlem or New Albany and go all the way north. I wanted to provide an update from our sewer meeting on Monday. Holly was in attendance at this meeting, and she can shed light where I'm not able to. This is actually the very PowerPoint that was presented to us at the meeting by Black and Veatch, who are the selected contractors for this project. The overall supervisor actually lives in the township on Gorsuch Road. So I had the opportunity to meet him and the engineer that will work on this specific project. So this was a kickoff meeting. These were the topics that were covered in this kickoff meeting. It involved Black and Veatch, Delaware County, engineer, a couple engineers, their boss, Tiffany Megg, and then Holly and myself from the township. They talked about the project scope and their objectives, which you'll see in greater detail. I'm not going to try and speak to all of these slides. Here's the entire service area. You can see the township that's right in the middle, and they reference the agreement with Columbus that was made with Polaris back in the mid-90s.
Here is the project in its background. This was a plan that Columbus developed. They never gave a date to this plan. Holly, do you recall?
That one was done, oh gosh, early 2000s.
Okay, it's a 20-year-old plan. And so just to orient you, this, can you see my cursor? That's Smothers Road right there. And so the trunk is that red dot. And this is Harlem Road going north. And notice how they have sewer, proposed sewer expanding all the way up to the very top here, which is Center Village. And so they're thinking in the context of this whole 208 service area. And remember that we're asking them to consider servicing the entire township in our discussion with Columbus. Notice it's interesting to me that Columbus envisions this route across the southern tier with trunk lines that are servicing down into Franklin County. So I think that you can expect to see development down in this corner off of Smothers. This is going to get developed. And then perhaps along here. Here's the objective, and we should all be familiar with this map. This property, this is Harlem Road running right up to the north. The property around purple here is the Jim Reed property, 95 acres. These properties are owned by the Yeagers. And the trailer park is down here. And Russell Miller's property is right down here at the beginning of the township. Here's all the information that they are gathering in order to develop the appropriate plan. And so they notice what they're seeking and what they've received. And notice that Joe's got a piece on this. Again, referencing this map, they're referencing pipe sizes, depth, etc. Now we're talking about a 48-inch sewer that in this initial run, and trying to get a depth that is appropriate to providing gravity flow up in this 208 area.
Are you going to put this on the website?
I will ask
back up for the meeting.
Let me ask Black and Veatch if I can do that. I don't know why they would be opposed, but let me ask. Sure.
Yeah.
This is again that map. So here are things that they're considering: evaluation criteria, construction methods, of course, the geology, groundwater impacts, environmental, cultural resources. They reference archaeology, Joni, which was interesting. Absolutely. And they reference the company that's doing their archaeology study as well. I wrote it down. I was like, is there like a CS&I or something like that? I wrote it down. I've got it for you. System expansion, future growth, maintenance, public impacts, easements, and cost. Those are all the things that they're going to be looking at over the next several months in this study. This is an example of open cut. So when they actually tear it up to put the sewer in, and you can imagine that has a pretty significant impact to folks' property. But that gives you an example of what it might look like. And they, in contrast, talked about microtunneling. And this is what a microtunnel work site looks like. I will say that it was clear in the course of the conversation, and Holly might have an opinion, that Black and Veatch favored microtunneling as a method of installation.
They talking about a 48-incher.
That'll come off the Columbus trunk. This initial run will be that size.
Bigger.
They don't know where it's going yet, but that's what the initial run is. One thing that Columbus said that was interesting was the only way they can access the trunk is via microtunneling. And so their argument was, hey, if we've already got the equipment in place, we might as well microtunnel the first run.
So with micro tunneling, there's no disturbance of the surface.
Minimal.
I would say that's a better way to put it. So you can see that there's that footprint has, you know, a generator on it and it's got heavy equipment and it's got an initial hole. I mean, there's definitely, it's clear what they're doing, but they're not having to tear up the whole route.
But there'll be access holes.
Yes,
all
that's
along.
correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Could the surface be used as a bike trail on top?
I don't think it's,
Just like your yard.
Yeah, you
so
can't build
Joe
on
says
it.
typically, yes. Yeah, it's going to be reclaimed. You know, it'll be reclaimed.
Like a lawn again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the 48-inch pipe, correct me if I'm wrong, John or Holly, I mean, they're talking a 50-foot easement.
That's correct.
You are at risk, you know, if you do put a bike path in that easement, that if there was a failure in that spot. And simply for that cost to put the bike path back.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't be allowed to build on that right away, right? You'd have to maintain that
There's open space.
as open space anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So let people walk on it, drive on it.
Yep.
Whatever.
Yep.
They're gonna have to move it, go in there to service it.
Yep.
So hop on a gator and drive down the path.
Geotechnical and hydrogeotechnical considerations that I cannot speak to in any intelligent way. Holly, were these soil borings they were going to make or have been made? They've made these, yeah,
Well,
as well as existing water wells, yeah. So here again is the environmental impact and are the evaluation criteria, which is good to see the thoroughness of this pre-planning that's going to be done. Here are options for preliminary design. So this shows, you know, the question is, are we trying to get to B04 or are we trying to get to B05? I think that's the unanswered question at this point.
What's the difference? What are you talking about? BO4, BO5?
Are we going to go straight up Harlem Road and then go east? Or there's also alternatives are going across the bottom of the township and then running north if we're headed for BO5. That has not yet been determined. They have to in the first phase have a 30% design submittal by a certain point in time. That doesn't hit us at all. They have to pursue easements, and this is important. Project schedule. So we learned via Bob on Friday, and I confirmed it with them on Monday, that they did encounter methane in the trunk line. They don't know if that's because of a failure to ventilate or if there's really excessive methane in the trunk. They're trying to figure that out, and
They cannot ventilate.
Did you just-
they're stuck.
Did you just learn this? Okay, so they think that's a 6-month extension.
At least.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you've got a trunk line that's going to take 6 more months. So now we're talking early 27. But this process is going to start. And they speculate that if things go well, that they could be looking at an early 27 completion. That they could knock 6 months off this.
Management at risk, which means that they hire a manager up front, they're part of the design, and it shortens up that long green space at the bottom. So that they get done potentially 6 months early.
So that
What is done mean?
installed.
Huh? To
Installed
what point? What's the?
well, they don't know that yet. That's
Oh,
what
okay.
that's
What, it's A or B?
that's right.
Okay,
That's
but
right.
That's what they're saying.
But what you're seeing then is you're seeing a consistency between the trunk line finishing and the first run of the sewer finishing. It looks like 27 timeframe. which that's good for us to know. And really that's the last thing that really applies to us. Questions or comments that I can't speak to, Steve?
Yeah, well, I guess what surfaced at the last trustees meeting was if they have to, whatever, the cost overrun from the initial estimates.
Yes, and so what was not discussed at all.
That affect us?
Yes, it does. What was not discussed at all, this is an important point, and thanks for bringing it up, was cost. And so I talked to Tiffany about that, and she said it's premature for us to discuss that at this point until this study is done. And then the county, the commissioners will look at this and will make a determination about what costs they will bear. And have a discussion then with the township. And I don't know that we should go further than that. But I think that the county recognizes that it could be significant, and they may be willing to bear a significant weight of that cost. Time will tell, but that will certainly play a role in our input. Now,
I mean, what if our message, look, I agree, it's all speculation.
yes,
Right, but I mean, what if we said, well, we don't have any money for this?
we'd be lying. Because over the next 10 or 15 years, we will have money for this. So what they're not saying is you have to pay for this up front. What they're saying is, hey, we're going to pay for it, but can we recoup our costs over the next 15 years?
Well, I think that's the nitty gritty.
Yes, that's right.
When, once they get all the facts and the study done, needs a, hard, open look. That's not
Yeah.
what they're putting forward.
And Tiffany said, this is why your economic development plan is so important, so that we can speak intelligently to this. So I think that conversation will occur. And that we shouldn't overly speculate at this point.
I agree.
Yeah.
John, it's my understanding that county is going to be meeting with the trustee board to determine where the trustee board wants the direction of the sewer to go.
So in that regard, and it became pretty clear to me in the course of this that we are not experts and that they're going to come to a recommendation and they're going to communicate to us with that recommendation. And that I don't know, Bob, that we have the expertise to
Talk about the expertise. It's if Joe Simonello develops Russ Miller and 4 other properties.
Right.
And the township says that's where we want the sewer to go. It is my understanding that the county will go in that direction.
I asked Holly that specific question. Tiffany, sorry, Holly. And she said it is short-sighted thinking to look for a quick economic return on a Miller or on those tap fees at the trailer park. She said we're looking at a much larger strategic picture here. And so she said that won't even be a consideration in our process.
She mentioned that the depth and how if you move a certain way that it would cause the depth to be shallower and create the need for force mains and increase the cost for a future development of
But
sewers.
if the township, again, maybe I'm incorrect, if the township prefers to go down Fancher Road because the township believes that that's where the development is going to come and pay for it, that is my understanding.
I think that's a piece of the puzzle. I talked to them about, is there gonna be a matrix? Is there gonna be a matrix like of green and yellow and red? If green is good, red is, bad, and are we gonna be able to see each option and what's green and what's red about each one of them? And they said yes.
And I think that that's where we inform them of, these are what we see as the positives, these are what we see as the negative, and that feeds into that process. But I didn't get from that meeting that the trustees get to make the decision.
We can say, here's our opinion,
Mhm.
which what I greatly value is they're including us in this conversation. And we were equal members sitting at that table. And so I think we're a part of the process. But I came away with a kind of a humble perspective about the complexity of something like this. And that I would be very hesitant to push my opinion against the experts.
I think their planners are gonna come up with the best suggestion of where it's gonna be placed to serve the most land and future to the north or the east, so that we have to respect that, yes.
Whatever.
So time will tell. I love that it's a transparent conversation.
Thinking it's going to be all gravity fed?
The property that is to the west of Harlem Road, probably pump stations. And they want to get as far north as they can with gravity fed. And they believe, and in fact, one of their engineers believe that a large portion of the northeast quadrant could be gravity fed. Beyond Center Village. So their goal is to, as much as possible, be gravity fed. I had heard from some sources that Delaware County was very negative on pump stations, but I didn't get that impression. They're just $20 million a shot.
That's why they're negative.
Yeah.
Way back when, the initial plan for this at Smothers, was there not some type of, whether it be negotiations or statements made by the commissioners that were in at that time, that there was a certain amount that they were going to initially pay for Delaware County, Harlem Township? Or as on the plan of the sewer coming into Harlem Township?
When they first engaged us and they thought this was about a $7.5 million project, they were like, we're paying for it all. When it became a micro tunneling project and became more expensive, they thought, well, we're going to need to recoup some of these funds over time. So I think that conversation will be had, but I don't know where it will come down. I think that Delaware County will bear a significant part of this initial run.
I'm hopeful because on many occasions, we've talked about the rest of the county and the townships, that with Harlem being as far south and east as you can be in Delaware County, that many occasions they indeed have forgotten that Harlem Township is a part of Delaware County on just the movement of a lot of things. And some of that comes to play far as just north, far as going up to 36 and 605, they've kind of and that doesn't play into effect but far as the roads, the traffic patterns and such. And it's kind of like, again, remember that, we're over here and we are Delaware County.
Yeah, I think that we're becoming a bigger blip on their radar screen. Yeah.
But I'm sorry to say, I personally feel that, yeah, it's definitely about time they realized, and, like we were the stepchild.
Copy. Yeah. That's all I have as far as sewer update. I talked about preservation parks. I don't think this meeting should go more than 2 hours. I have handed to my peers job descriptions for a township administrator in Prairie, Genoa, and Berkshire townships. Uh, and so that's for their review.
Okay.
And we can then maybe begin unpacking those more in our next meeting. So I'll let you guys take a look at that. And then I did want to reemphasize that my goal is to meet with large property owners and developers that are in the southwest corner of the township to do this very thing that we've talked about. How can we work collaboratively to create an effort that is more unified, striving for a particular vision, et cetera. So just getting those folks around a table and having a conversation that begins to articulate, hey, here's where we are as a township in regard to economic planning, strategic priorities. Here's where the infrastructure development is. We've got a year or two to really think about what this is going to look like. Let's say this 800-acre beginning of development. How can we work together toward developing this well and thoughtfully, intentionally? So that is kind of on the radar for April or for late May. That's all I have.
Okay. Any comments before we close out?
Pizza for poll workers. I have a note. Pizza for
Okay.
poll workers.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that.
Would the trustees have a problem if I ordered pizza for about 8 to 10 people in both of our polling locations?
You're fine.
And I could just put it on the township credit card and be reimbursed. And R&B and let that come out of a fund. I don't know what fund.
I don't know.
I'll at least determine that.
Figure it out.
Yeah. Are you guys good with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pete, you got anything tonight? You weren't on the agenda, but we'll give you a shot at it. No? Good man. Okay. I don't have anything else.
I would like to say, if you're looking for information on the aggregation program, I'm getting so many phone calls a day. So I have a platform. I'm going to talk about it. The aggregation program. If you do not opt out, you are automatically opted in if you are not part of another aggregation program. If you would like to opt out, there will be opt-out letters going out here soon. They will go to the residents. If you do not want to wait on the aggregation letters to come from Archer Energy, which is going to be the aggregation program, you can go on our website at harlemtwp.com. On that main page, go all the way to the bottom of the page to latest news. It says Treble Energy Aggregation Program. Click on that. There are 3 links. The first one is the presentation given by Aaron at the meeting on the 16th. The 2 after that are for the electric and for the natural gas. Click on those. They give you all the information on pricing, dates, things like that. It also gives you a link to their email. If you have any questions, I am less educated on it than they are. So email and call them. If you have
Correct.
AEP,
And it's
if you have co-op, you're good. No, it's AEP.
No, for gas.
Oh, for gas, yeah.
Yeah, it's only Columbia.
Yeah, it's Columbia and AEP. But you will be automatically opted in if you do not opt out. And you have to do that through them. I cannot. This is Ashley. I cannot opt you out. So please don't send me emails saying, can you please opt me out? Because you will not be opted out because I can't do it for you. So go to those links, go to the website, or wait for that letter.
Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, no
Okay,
problem.
thank you. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. I'll second
All in favor? Aye.
it. All in favor, aye.
Thanks, Bob.
Gentlemen.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I cannot opt you out. You have to do that yourself.